Hey, it's Shadow ACS with another Top 10. In my years of perusing the internet, I've come across a number of complete idiots who've accused anime of being quote-unquote emo. Now, while it is a fact that people who say this are the absolute lowest form of human shit imaginable, and deserve to be chopped into bits with the rusty end of a shovel before having the pieces thrown into a meat grinder, eradicating them and their moronic gene pool polluting ideas from existence, there might actually be some measly scrap of almost logic behind their stupid-ass, poorly reasoned viewpoints. Anime is generally more emotional than your average dumbass blockbuster movie, which the aforementioned idiots most likely enjoy wasting their lives in front of like the useless pieces of human shit they are. Okay, you get my point. In any case, the fact that anime is so emotional is a big part of why intelligent folks such as myself love it so much. So today I'm going to celebrate that with my top 10 most depressing anime characters. Now before I start the list, I want to clarify that this is not the same as characters who die. I already made a countdown for that. These are characters who just thinking about them brings back sad memories of all the horrible stuff they had to go through, and how I as a viewer was emotionally affected by those events. Also be warned that there may have to be some minor spoilers on this countdown for me to be able to talk about these characters, which I will try to keep to a minimum, but nevertheless, tread at your own risk. Keep in mind as well that as with all my top 10s, I'm limited to anime I've already seen. I'm aware I'm leaving out famously depressing anime like Elfen Lied and Neon Genesis Evangelion. But remember, if I haven't seen an anime, I can't put it on this video. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at my top 10 most depressing anime characters. Number 10. Tsubaki from Future Diary. This is probably the most sympathetic villain character I have ever seen, to the point where I even hesitate to call her a villain. Tsubaki was the daughter of the founders of a crazy cult of zealots called the Omakata, or Sacred Eye Cult, who basically built a religion around Tsubaki. But after her parents died in a car wreck, the new head of the religion declared that Tsubaki's body should be used as a sponge for the followers to, quote, cleanse their sins, which basically meant that she would be confined to a cell while countless men would come in and rape her. And because Tsubaki was born almost blind, she had no way to fight back. What makes Tsubaki such a great villain is that even though she betrays and lies to the main characters and tries to have them killed, you never stop feeling sorry for her. Because you know she's not inherently evil, just a victim of tragic circumstances who's lashing out at the world because of the horrible life she's had to lead. Even her death scene, which occurs while she's trying to have the main female lead raped, doesn't have any sort of triumphant feel to it. It's very sad. The main character Yuki throws a handball to distract her, which was the only keepsake she had from when her parents were alive. So she's reminded of what her life used to be and all the horrible things that have happened to it right as she passes away. As psychological anime go, Future Diary is one of the most twisted, but also one of the most memorable. And I think those are both perfect words to describe Tsubaki's character. Number 9. Kikyo from Inuyasha. I know a lot of people don't like this character, and to be honest I can kinda see why, but I'll go over that in a bit. Like Tsubaki, what really makes Kikyo worthy of this list is her sad backstory. And while Kikyo's backstory isn't as outright depressing as Tsubaki's, it also plays a much bigger role in the story, so we get to experience the effects of it a lot more. Kikyo was a priestess in charge of protecting a powerful gem known as the Sacred Jewel, which can grant the wishes of demons. So naturally things got rather complicated when she fell in love with the half-demon Inuyasha. Kikyo was able to convince Inuyasha to use the jewel to discard his demon power and become a full human. But then a shape-shifting demon named Naraku came along and messed everything up. Naraku tricked Kikyo and Inuyasha into betraying each other by shape-shifting into the other one and attacking them, fatally wounding Kikyo and causing her to seal Inuyasha to a tree where he remains until the beginning of the actual story. Kikyo is eventually brought back to life years later in a counterfeit body, but she's much more cold and indifferent toward Inuyasha, and seems to regard their past romance as a mistake. Which is probably the reason why a lot of people don't really gravitate toward her character. She is manipulative and at times outright cruel toward him. But I think it's made up for 100-fold by the aforementioned backstory. Part of what makes Kikyo such a tragic character is just how strong the love between her and Inuyasha was. I will admit that the two don't share a lot of chemistry, but keep in mind that the only time we actually get to see and experience their relationship is in a pair of episodes that detail their history, whose combined running time only amounts to about 40 minutes. And considering that this is a backstory that almost has enough stuff going on to fill an entire show, the fact that this romance is as powerful as it is, I think is impressive enough. Overall, Kikyo might not be the most popular character on the show, but it's hard not to feel anything when you find out what's happened to her. Number 8. Fuko from Clannad. Yeah, surprisingly, Clannad ended up being the lowest ranking key anime on this countdown. I know that might seem weird seeing as how I've constantly praised this anime as an emotional marvel, but when looking at this cast, I actually had a hard time finding characters that would qualify as, quote, depressing. Part of what makes Clannad such a masterpiece is that it has a perfect blend of happy and sad moments. In fact, it's because the happy moments are so wonderful that the sad stuff hits so hard. But regardless, let's talk about Fuko. And it should be noted that this is a case where I have to go into major spoiler territory, so go to number 7 right now if that's a problem. Fuko first appears as sort of an oddball comic relief girl who spends most of her time in a classroom carving wooden stars.
Starfish!
And she's also obsessed with starfish. Fuko plans to give the wooden starfish out to people as invitations to come to her sister's wedding. But then it's revealed that Fuko is actually the ghost of a girl who was hit by a car and is currently in a coma, and that her spirit had come back to help out her sister, even though her sister can't actually see Fuko herself. Yeah, one thing you have to keep in mind about key anime is that you occasionally have to take supernatural stuff like this at face value. Eventually, it's found out that the condition of Fuko's body in the hospital has gotten worse, which leads to one of the parts of this show that every fan just balls over: Fuko being forgotten. This isn't like a character death where it's over in a heartbeat and you can get over it in 20 minutes. They take several episodes to show Fuko gradually fading out of existence, as less and less people notice she's even there, even one she was close friends with just a couple days ago. And there's also the fact that she has such a strong friendship with the two main characters and how they try so desperately to get people to remember her. It just crushes me every time I see this part of the show. The reason I put Fuko so low on this list, despite what a powerful story arc this is that when I think of her character, I don't just think of the sad stuff. The first half of her story arc is filled with great comedy and a lot of happy moments, and her adorable starfish obsession. Much like the show itself, she's equal parts happy and sad. And let's face it, this is a list of the top 10 most depressing characters, not the top 10 most well-written depressing characters. If it was the latter, she'd probably be a lot higher. But as is, Fuko is definitely a character well worthy of the number 8 spot on this countdown. Number 7. Hirai from Shakugan no Shana and Sachi from Sword Art Online. That's right, for the first time I actually have a tie on one of my countdowns. Some might call that cheating, but the reason I put these two together is, well, they're pretty damn similar. Both Hirai and Sachi first appear toward the beginning of their shows and are killed off shortly after they're introduced. Both form a strong bond with the main character shortly before they die, and in both cases their death helps to show the tragic and twisted nature of the world the show takes place in. In Shakugan no Shana, Hirai was a girl in the same class as the main character Yuji. She had a crush on Yuji's best friend, so she often hung out with Yuji to try and get close to him. But when Yuji gets pulled into the trippy dimension where he first meets Shana, Hirai is pulled in along with him, and has her existence devoured while inside. Once they go back to the real world, she seems fine at first, but we find out through Shana that she's now become a replacement existence called a torch, which will gradually fade out of everyone's consciousness until it'll be like she never existed to begin with. Yuji spends most of the second episode desperately trying to keep Hirai from being forgotten in whatever way he can, much like with Fuko from Clannad. Although here I would argue it's even sadder because we have to watch her personality fade away as well as people's memory of her. She's so active and emotional when we first see her, but gradually becomes more and more lifeless as her existence fades away. In Sword Art, Sachi's circumstances are a bit different. Early on in the show, the main character Kirito decides to join a guild called the Moonlit Black Cats, which Sachi is the weakest member of. A fact which secretly terrifies her because the show takes place in a video game where losing is literally a matter of life and death. As time goes on, Kirito finds himself getting attached to the members of this guild, especially Sachi. But then one day, the guild accidentally enters into a trap room that they can't escape from, and is filled with monsters that are too powerful for them to defeat. Kirito was the only one strong enough to survive and was unable to do anything while Sachi and all the other guild members were killed right in front of him. Now in terms of the deaths themselves, I personally think Hirai's is a little sadder. As heartbreaking as Sachi's death is, I do think they may have given it a bit too much foreshadowing. Like there's this big emotional scene between her and Kirito where she talks about how afraid she is of dying. I don't know, did that strike anyone else as being a bit too obvious? Don't get me wrong, it's still a really good emotional scene, I just think it might have been better if they made it a little less obvious that they were gonna kill her off. But it's made up for by the impact her death has on the main character. With Hirai, Yuji pretty much gets over her death after a couple episodes, mostly because the show just needed to move along the plot. But in Sword Art, Kirito is traumatized by Sachi's death. And for a solid quarter of the show, he's afraid to get close to anyone because he doesn't want to watch any more people die. Both Hirai and Sachi are some of the most powerful anime characters out there, despite the fact that neither of them last for very long. They're some of the most memorable and tragic parts of two great shows. Number 6. Karya, from Fate Zero. This poor guy just cannot catch a break. In fact, I'm trying to think if anything good happens to him throughout this entire anime. Karya is one of the 7 contestants fighting in the Holy Grail War, which the plot of this show revolves around. And the really sad part is that he seems to be the only one going into this war with completely pure intentions. All the other masters just want glory or power, or they have good motives but they use corrupt methods to achieve them. All Karya wants to do is save an innocent girl's life. And what does he get in return? His insides get eaten out by worms in order to obtain the magical power he needs. He's saddled with a servant who's completely insane and uncontrollable. He doesn't win a single battle throughout the course of the entire war, and is betrayed and deceived into killing the people he loves. And what makes it even worse is that you kinda know he's doomed right from the beginning just based on the fact that he's given the least screen time out of all the 7 masters. Almost as if even the director of the show wants him to suffer. By far the most hauntingly dark scene with Karya is this one scene toward the end of the anime that takes place inside of a church. I don't want to give away too much about it, but I will say this. While I generally despise misunderstandings in any kind of show, the one in this scene is used effectively, and it makes for an incredibly intense and heartbreaking scene. For a complex show like Fate Zero where every character has ambiguous and conflicting motives, Karya is a character I think everyone can rally behind, or at least sympathize with. Stay tuned for part 2.